Paul. Hi, Frédéric, thank you for joining us for this roundtable. I will leave immediately Edoardo to set up and start this roundtable. But it's a pleasure to have you around and participate to the second technical roundtable, because I just remind that yesterday we had the first part of the webinar working on the observables, optical, electromagnetic, and so on, and we had so a roundtable about the observable. And today we are just shifting of technical subject, still related to the UAP, but looking at this from a different perspective, concerning the interactivity or the interaction of the UAP together with the medium, okay? And the medium, of course, is including the natural environment and so on, but also the people, also the, I would say, life being. And then I think there are plenty of opportunities for the discussion. So now, Edoardo, please, you take the lead. And
thank you. No leading. Only trying to stimulate people who are very competent and already on the subject. So we will have a roundtable discussion about the same item that we had in the morning, that is effects. We already defined what the effect may be, and Luc was explaining once again. And the five attending people, which I'd like to welcome, Frédéric Courtade, that is a physicist engineer from France, working with the National Space Center, the French NASA, so to say. But most important, he is the present, I'd like to say, director of the JPAN, the study group on UAP that Knuth have been keeping active since 1977. Professor Kevin Knuth from the United States is a full professor in physics in the University at Albany, but is also the lead scientist for the UAPX and a member of Scientific Coalition for UAP Studies, of the Society for UAP Studies, and has an impressive curriculum. And of course, he is on the physical effects side. Geoffrey Mestchersky already spoke today, and he is on the physical side of he talked about some fragments. He holds a degree in geochemistry, has been working for French scientific institutions, still working at some scientific research center. Then we will have Yasmin Rouxel, that I don't know if she's already arrived, but she is a clinical psychologist in the University of Paris-Nanterre. She is a member of Sigma 2 Commission, and of course she is interested and competent on the human side, the psychological approach to UAP experience. We said in the early morning that there are physiological effects on witnesses, there are psychological effects too, and on the same side of the coin, Anne Tyler, that we already heard from up to a few minutes ago. She's a licensed mental health professional from the USA. She is active with the Society for UAP Studies too. She has worked on the projects she talked about, once again, about our main tool, the witnesses, the experiencers, as they are now called. And I suppose that this distinguished discussion team now will keep us alive for this discussion. So if you have no objection, I would like to ask Frédéric Courtade to begin to tell us something about JPAN's role, activity in this side of physical effects and what he likes. please.
Yes, thank you, Edoardo. Yes. First of all, I would like to say that the interaction with the medium is not the main mission of GEPAN. Nevertheless, when an investigation is done, it can lead to the study this kind of effect, and you said by UAP. So GEPAN can take over the expertise, or when the French enforcement forces are already in charge of the investigation, GEPAN can assist and the French gendarmerie to help them and build hypotheses on the way on the origin of the disturbance of the medium. So the strong and historic links and collaboration in between GEPAN and gendarmerie are very helpful to make easy the cross expertise, I would say. And up to now, the French gendarmerie let us publish the official results of the investigation in our website without any restriction. So this is something very very open, and we have nothing to hide in this field of investigations. So Edoardo told me during an email to speak if we have new cases of interaction with the medium. I have extracted some cases from our database, so I can make a short description, and I have also illustration if I can share the screen for everybody if you want. The first one was located in the north of Paris, in a small village. It was during the summer 1990, and on July 1980, the CEPRA, which was the former name of GEPAN, was informed via press, the media, of the discovery of a large crater that's appeared in the field. The diameter of the crater was 40 meters wide, and there was a crown in this crater which of collapsed ground, and approximately 2 meters wide, 2.5 meters wide, and in a central tumulus of 4.5 meters by 1.5 meters in height. And when examining the rocks, it was an investigation jointly done by the CEPRA and the French gendarmerie. Two hypotheses was launched, retained: the fall of a large meteorite, or an explosion, an underground explosion. So excavator was mobilized to explore the crater and proceeding for delayering of the ground about each 50 centimeters, and the exploration will go and continue to the depth of 7 meters. And the investigation, during the investigation, fragment of sheet and of sheet of metal were found at various steps. 25 metal fragments were recovered, and so the hypothesis of the fall of a large meteorite was not valuable anymore. So we move to the other hypothesis, and we gave CEPRA and Gendarmerie gave the fragment to the French DGA, so the Délégation Générale of Armament, which is an army organization. And in their in-house laboratory, they made expertise, and they find that the piece of metal came from incendiary bombs of the British and American origin, probably manufactured in April 1942. So I have some illustration if you want, if I can share. Okay, so it was some illustration of the case that I have described. So it was here you are a picture given who was published in the media, in the newspaper, in the local newspaper there. You can see the crater from in the film. In the field, it was around this corn culture. And here you have a picture from during the investigation with the excavator all what was done into the crater. Here you have all the pieces of metal found during this excavation, and during the expertise at the French DGA, we find this inscription on some piece of metal, and there we see the sign of an incendiary bomb, in fact. So the cases was at this time ranked A. So in the Japan ranking A, the phenomenon is fully explained, and the conclusion given at the time was the crater was formed due to the explosion, underground explosion of incendiary bomb from the Second World War. This is one of the examples. I can move to another one, but I don't want to speak to make all the speech. If I can make for another.
Yes, please proceed.
Okay. Another one, which is where Japan was mobilized for another by another witness, and in this testimony, it was in 2007 in October, and people found black deposit on their lawn. It was a private lawn, and suddenly appearing during the night. Diameter of this circle were vary between 5.9 meters and 10 meters for width, and approximately a discus of 30 centimeter width. And the investigation carried at the time by the Gendarmerie, once again, in Japan. Sample are taken, and the analysis of this sample was done. The sample was done to a mycology department of the Faculty of Pharmacy in Toulouse, yeah, and they found an exceptional formation of a kind of mushrooms, a mix between mushroom and bacteria, which grow suddenly and can lead to the formation of this kind of circles. I have once again a picture of this. Okay, I think it's there. Oh, yes, so you have here the fact, the sudden apparition of the circle of mushroom, not clearly linked for an UAP, but in this case again, the Japan was mobilized to try to understand what's happened. Okay, so if another one takes I have other examples, but Edoardo.
don't you have any class D example of physical trace?
Sorry?
Didn't you have any unexplained ground
No.
traces beside those explainable in your experience?
No, we don't have. Regarding the interaction with the medium, I don't screen all the case. We have 100 unexplained cases in our database, the GEPAN database. I didn't screen all the case, but I think we don't have. We haven't any unexplained cases during where there is an interaction with the medium.
Okay, so either you were unlucky or you were too good at doing an explanation work. Let's see what Professor Knuth would tell us about the physical side from the other side of the ocean, from the United States.
All right, hello. Yeah, I was interested in the problems of effects on cars, on automobiles, and I was looking into this, and I'm mostly going to talk about work that was done by James McCampbell and from Mark Roediger's database. So if I can share my screen as well, I'll do that. And let's see here, where is this? I can share this one, yes. All right, and let me scroll up to where I was wanting to talk about. There we go. So I was interested back in 1977. There was the movie The Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and there was the scene in that movie where Richard Dreyfuss's truck has a UFO over it, and it stops running, and then all sorts of strange things start happening. And when the UFO leaves, the truck starts up again. And I remember seeing that in the theater at the time, thinking, "Oh, that's just silly. That can't possibly happen." And I was I rewatched the movie recently, and I saw that scene again, and I thought, well, that's really strange, and I had heard of that happening in some cases, so I decided to look into this in some more detail, and found that McCampbell in 1983 had done some work on this that I found quite interesting. So he had identified multiple automobile interference types. You had engine disruption and failure. The engine fails to restart in the vicinity of the UFO, so somebody will try to start their engine and can't. And when the UFO departs, there are times when the engine starts itself up again. And that one especially I found very strange. And I was delighted to find that he had a hypothesis for why this happens. And so I looked into that more carefully. So McCampbell's hypothesis was that the UFO is creating high electric fields to ionize the air, which could be shorting out the spark plugs and distributor cap in the cars. So these electric fields would have to be very high. You've got to have an electric field on the order of about 1 million volts per meter, or 3 times 10 to the 6 volts per meter. So these are very high electric fields, and in Mark Roediger's catalog from 1981, he had 268 cases in which the engine stopped, and only 27 of which the engine restarted or self-started when the UFO departed. So about 10% of the time, the automobiles that were shut down would start up again. Now, one thing that was found is that this only happens with the automobiles that were shut down were gasoline engines, not diesel engines. Diesel engines typically kept running. I think there was one case out of all of those cases where a diesel engine shut down, but usually the diesel engines keep running. But older gasoline engines would shut down, and these are old cars which is before the time that they were computer controlled. So these are older ignition systems. Now, one point of note, in the movie, Richard Dreyfuss is driving a Ford F-150, which is a diesel engine, and that would not have been shut down by a UFO. So there's a bit of inaccuracy in the movie, which is fine. And I'm willing to suspend disbelief of it there, too, certainly. But I'm going to go over how the ignition system works, because we're basically, in this situation, you're basically using the automobile as a detector. If you think of it this way, the automobile is being used as a detector, and we often get complaints from scientists now that are saying, well, you don't have any calibrated information equipment that's taking these data, so how can we trust any of this? Well, an automobile engine that's running or not running is perhaps about as calibrated as you might want. So this is a schematic of how the older ignition systems on an automobile work. Again, this is before they were computer controlled. You basically have your car battery, you have your ignition switch, so your key's in the ignition, so this is turned on. You have a distributor cam that rotates and flips switches that basically connect the ignition coil, the primary ignition coil, to the battery. So when your cam is switched on for a particular cylinder of the car, you've got a current running through the primary ignition coil. Now, this ignition coil is basically a transformer. So you've got a primary and a secondary. And when you flip the switch to open the circuit, that magnetic field around the primary collapses and induces a current into the secondary, which sends a high voltage pulse to the spark plug. And that ignites the gas air mixture in the cylinder. And that's basically how it works when it's running properly. Now the UFO comes over and hovering over the car or nearby the car, and now you have a problem that you have very high electric fields, and so these switches are getting shorted out. So the spark plug is shorted out basically from here to where the hex nut is. So you aren't going to get any current flow through the spark plug, through the spark gap. So you can't ignite the cylinder, so the car will shut down. Also, the distributor cam can be shorted out, which means that you've got a current running through the primary coil. So you've got a magnetic field set up around this coil while the UFO is hovering over the car. Now the car's not running, so this distributor cam isn't rotating, so the switch isn't changing its state. So it's basically poised to send a pulse to the spark plug. And now when the UFO departs, the air is no longer ionized, so the switch opens up again. You don't have this connection anymore, and the current stops flowing through the primary, and so that magnetic field collapses. It induces a magnetic field into the secondary, which then sends a spark to the spark plug. And if that cylinder is in the state where you've got a gas-air mixture ready to fire, then you're going to get a spark that will ignite the gas in that cylinder, and that piston will go and can start the car up. So now you have to calculate the probability that the piston's going to be in a state to fire. So a power stroke of these types of cars, basically, the power stroke takes 145 degrees out of the 720-degree cycle. So 20% of the time, that cylinder is going to be in the power stroke, which is basically the stroke that it needs to be in to be able to fire. And in half of those cases, it's going to be prepared to fire with a gas-air mixture in the right phase of that power stroke. And so 10% of the time, the car should restart, or you should actually get a piston to fire as the UFO departs. So you can actually calculate this and use this hypothesis to make predictions. So you should predict that out of all the cars that are shut down by a UFO, 10% should try to restart when the UFO departs. And that's exactly what you see with the numbers. Out of the 268 cases that Mark Roediger had cataloged of an automobile stopping, 27% or 27 of them restarted. So that's about 10%, which is very satisfying. Geoffrey, you have a question.
Yes, thank you. So correct me if I'm wrong. If I remember my physics lessons when I was in high school, except electrostatic field, the electric field are always associated with magnetic field, right?
I can't quite hear that. The electric field, what? What is the?
Except the electrostatic field, when you have an electric field, it's always associated with a magnetic field, right?
When you have a changing electric field, you have a changing magnetic field.
Yes. So
yeah.
in your case, could the magnetic field could be responsible for the breakdown of the engine, or because for you that's a high electric field that could be responsible for the breakdown, but what about the magnetic field?
That's a very good question, and there was some work done to study whether magnetic fields can shut down cars, and they can apparently shut down cars. So a magnetic field could shut down a car, but the magnetic field, a static magnetic field, wouldn't explain the car restarting.
Okay.
Whereas this explanation with the electric field does explain the car restarting. So this is a bit more satisfying. It explains more of the data. No, that's a very good question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there was also I described this at the Soul Foundation as well, and there was some later comments on whether such high electric fields would cause electric shocks in the person and could, hurt the person's nervous system in this. And that's probably not the case because, well, you could have situations where that happens, but typically these are the same field strengths that you get when you get an electric shock in the winter. You're shuffling your feet on the carpet and then you touch something metal and you feel a shock. That's about the same voltage. The problem in air is that these high electric fields aren't going to create much current. You're not going to get much current flow. And the current is the problem with when it comes to physiological effects.
Okay.
So the interesting thing for me was that this hypothesis of a high electric field shorting out switches in the car's circuitry explains the number of cases that you have where a car engine restarts, and it explains which types of cars will restart and which won't. And I found that very satisfying. The other thing that I think is important to point out is that because the statistics here matches the hypothesis, the 27 people who reported their car restarting out of the 268 cases, those 27 people were telling the truth, as were the people in the 268 cases. For both of these numbers have to be commensurate to have this match the hypothesis. And so this also points out that witnesses are reporting things accurately, at least this aspect accurately. And I think that that's important to point out because witness testimony is always the first thing to be trashed and made fun of. And here we see that the witness testimony actually agrees with the theory. So that's also helpful.
And so what would be your guess if an electric car that we find everywhere now would encounter an UFO?
That's a good question. I don't exactly know how the electric car doesn't work with distributing sparks to a spark plugs. So you don't have that aspect. It would depend on how these high electric fields would affect the motors and how well those motors are shielded. Another question that had come up was that isn't an automobile basically a Faraday cage? How are these electric fields getting into the car? But the car is not a completely closed Faraday cage. Where you're sitting is, where the passengers are, it is. But the hood of the car, under which the engine sits, the underside is wide open. And so it's not really a Faraday cage. But how it's going to affect an electric motor on an electric car, I'm not sure, or or the battery system on an electric car. Those are very good questions.
And now with the big electric cars we found, there are huge batteries, in it. And could it be a danger? It could be a danger.
Well, it's a good question. If you've got the ionized air and you're shorting out a giant battery, that could be a problem. Yeah. And so I'm not aware of any current studies, and maybe some of you can inform me if any of you know, of modern automobile effects on effects from UFOs. From maybe the last 10 years would be very good to know what how UFOs influence cars, because we now have more different types of cars out there. So we have different detectors, right? Different kinds of detectors. You have electric cars, we still have diesel, we still have gasoline cars, but the gasoline cars are computer controlled, which is different again. And so it would be very interesting to know how UFOs are interacting with vehicles, modern vehicles, and how that's changed those relationships.
Kevin, I would like to ask a question and make a remark. First of all, thank you for these elements. That's completely very, very interesting. And this is probably an axis of possible joint work with the Sigma 2 team and Dr. Labonne and other people, of course. Now, about the question, do we have any possibility to identify possibility for having an electromagnetic modulated field, okay, trying to identify the frequency and so on, because that's a very important question mark regarding the other observations. In many presentations, we came back to same frequency, like 3 gigahertz and so on, during the presentation from Gérard Labonne. Okay, he was mentioning some frequency, which is upper frequency around 10 gigahertz, but these types of frequency were recorded during UAP observation, including by the US Air Force. Having said that, so there is a question of the modulation of frequency, and the other question is about any observation of the passenger reaction. For example, I remember that in some cases where UAP was flying around or above a vehicle, the passenger could have some feeling, for example, about the test, the change of the test. And we know that for example, microwave and so on could induce that sort of effect. Do you have any indication of a similar reaction?
Those are excellent questions. I know that people have recorded oscillating electric fields, and the frequencies that I've heard of are that they're sometimes changing around 10 to 12 hertz. Mm-hmm. So they're rather low frequency fields. Now, this is still important, especially when it comes to physiology, because the alpha rhythms in our brain are about 10 to 12 hertz. And the alpha rhythms happen when you close your eyes and relax. The alpha rhythms tend to build up in the brain. Now, my PhD thesis was actually in studying magnetic fields generated by the human auditory cortex. So I've done my PhD work was actually studying oscillations, in the electrical oscillations in the brain and magnetic. And one thing that I was aware of was that you could get the alpha rhythms in your brain at about 10 to 12 hertz are easily entrained. So it's easy to induce those rhythms. So flashing lights at 10 to 12 hertz will create algorithms at 10 to 12 hertz in your brain. And this is one reason why flashing lights are dangerous for epileptics. However, if you were inducing currents into the brain at about 10 to 12 hertz, you probably would also induce algorithms, which would create, some sense of, that would give you some neurological sense that something is happening, that something is different. It could be related to a sense of relaxation and calmness, as I've heard reported from some people. And so I think that's another area of study that's very possible. And I've often wondered if this is what is going on with cattle when UFOs approach cows. Their algorithms are at a slightly different frequency. And so if you're inducing currents at the wrong frequency, it's not clear what that's going to do to a cow's brain. And that could cause distress in cows, which is observed sometimes. So there's another area of study there too.
Okay, thank you.
Can I add something about something that emerged from what Geoffrey said earlier and Kevin said now? Both of you used very old database collections. Geoffrey used 10 Phillips trace landing cases published by Knuth in 1975 in the first part of his paper. And Kevin mentioned both this one and Mark Rodiger's vehicle interference catalog that was published in 1981. So we are talking about the data collections arriving to more than 40 years ago, very old ones. Let's say that if we cut in two parts the history of UFOs, UAP since 1947 up to mid-70s, and then again from 1975 up to now, we have two equally large time periods. It would be nice to try to reproduce some of those results, statistical studies or analysis on a different subset, building more modern collections of similar data, vehicle interference, trace landing cases, in order to understand if something has changed, if there were some collection biases at the time or now, and so on. This is a project that might usefully be tried in stimulating those who are presently doing field investigation activity. I can think of the Mutual UFO Network case management system. If you had a look, MUFON uses specific questionnaire forms for vehicle interference or physical effects. And so if it is possible to access the data that have been collected since, let's say, the late 90s, because the CMS is collecting this way all incoming reports, investigated reports since the late 90s, that would be a nice check of results, even in the light of what Kevin was saying about the completely different alimentation and electrical parts in vehicles, for example. Present-day cars are quite different from those in the 70s or even in the 80s. So are the UAP still having the same effect on modern motors or not? That is a question that might be explored.
Yeah, I think that's very important, actually. I think that would be very helpful.
And just to complete your question, there is another one which came to my mind. Looking at the statistics that you had, do you have any indication on the meteo conditions? Dry weather, rainy weather, that type of things?
Oh, that's a good question too, yeah. You would want to know if it's raining or if it's foggy, that's going to affect how the electric field is interacting with things. You're right.
Yeah.
There's potentially a lot to study here still, and a lot of these things have barely, they've been looked at in some ways, but there's much more that could be done.
Okay.
I say that Jan has a question too.
I'm assuming this is theoretical. Is it possible to set up an experiment where you could actually induce one of these fields and have 27 cars sitting there to see whether one starts?
Yeah, you should. You could potentially do something like this. I don't remember who did the work. There was some work done to try to reproduce the effects of magnetic fields on cars, and so and I just don't remember off the top of my head who did this work, but I can perhaps look it up if somebody wants to email me and find out. But I think that was done experimentally, actually.
Well, listen, sirs, it's all very interesting, but we are running short of time. Could we interrupt the most interesting exposition by Kevin and move from physical effects to human beings effects? Since we have two of our lady participants that are on this side of the issue, that is Yasmin Rouxel and Anna Tyler.
Glad to see you all. So I listened with carefully. I listened carefully about your all the cases you spoke about, and I was wondering also about electric fields. If you join your studies to the behavior of people during those incidents with cars. Oh,
well, I think she was asking if there was any attempt to correlate the analysis on the cars with analysis on a human being. But I think this is a point that was raised by Kevin before, saying that, well, there is no real study to compare the two things. And this is probably an area of research, very interesting. And, to analyze the physiological effects on the human being, then the psychological effect. And that was exactly the team where Edoardo wanted to come, to have discussion around the effects on the people and the psychological effects. So
yes, just to complete, it's about, I'm doing a thesis, a study in order to do a PhD. And I'm just trying to see also as a difference between effects on the brain, which is not really my domain, but also effects which can be confused because sometimes you have psychological effects, typical psychological effects, which has to see with the uncanniness. That means that when you meet a strange situation, you will have some reactions, and it comes when the situation occurs. You have a lot of things going on into your psychism, and you can have some defense mechanism or other reactions to the phenomenon. And it's sometimes difficult to see the difference between the direct effects of, for example, an electrical field or something, and the effects of your own projection and what you put on your experience, the sense you give to it, and also the way you deal with the uncanniness, which is a way to feel the awareness of the situation. And anyway, any strange situation has to see with your own experience of uncanniness.
It's you that are posing the question, but it is a very profound and difficult question to cope with, and the more so since we were talking about some cataloging work that was very specialized. And so both Kevin and Geoffrey have been working on secondary sources, catalogs, not with the original investigation reports, for example. So we don't know if the investigators collected those other data that you are interested in. And that would be nice to check, but it is a completely yet to do work. It's a good suggestion that would need future work. So I think that roundtable discussions may be useful for this one to make some brainstorming that should bring to some concrete proposals for future works. So that is an interesting question, to cross-reference physiological effects, psychological effects. There are some authors that already discussed some of the issues you were putting on the table. So up to which point it is a psychological effect, and from what point it is a physiological effect. For example, Jen Randalls in the book UFO Reality. And we have been discussing about it with two neurophysiologists that are actively studying UAPs in these recent months. They have been asking for data because any specialist arriving now to the field, for example, Kevin, that is a recent precious acquisition to our field, are asking us for concrete data. And all of them are somewhat deluded by the fact that we can only offer anecdotal evidence from the past. So my question to the specialists is always the same. Why don't you suggest us a protocol of what to ask, what to look for? Because investigators need to collect useful data, and UAP students are amateurs and not always were or still are correctly guided, led to ask the correct questions, to collect the right data. When Frédéric was showing us the example of the fairy ring, that's the name in the Anglo-Saxon word for those rings. I was smiling because we had a lot of investigation of similar reports, and when Geoffrey was eliminating a part of the ground traces in his morning paper, saying, well, let's put aside all those reports where there is a trace, a ground trace, but there is no landing, there is not the UFO, there is not the witness. Well, this is a discussion that has been made a long time ago and has led to quite a few cleaning of databases, at least from some UFO organization. So yes, that's interesting. For example, Mark Rodriguez's catalog was mainly American. Mark was not aware at the time that there was a British ufologist from the BUFORA, the British UFO Research Association, Geoffrey Mestchersky, that was doing the same work. And the two catalogs had some overlapping, but are not identical. After that effort, an Australian researcher that is still active, Keith Basterfield, created a catalog of Australasian vehicle interference. It would have been nice to compare these different, geographically different databases. Or there was a French researcher that collected a similar sample. There is an Italian one, there is a Spanish one. We need to put together some of these past collections, but also to stimulate a better way of collect data. Something that Yasmin was telling, for example, there is a famous close encounter of the third kind with ground traces in Italy, where the witness was confronted with a landed UFO, a classical flying saucer with two humanoids making a complete walk around the car. The car stopped suddenly, but as soon as the humanoids were again on board of the saucer and the flying saucer, the UFO, the UAP took off, the car engine started again and suddenly broke again because the man had no longer the foot on the pedal, of course. And we had a long discussion about the fact that was this a real experience, a physical one, or was it a sort of subjective experience that lasted for just, I don't know, a second, but created the problem? We have no answer to this question, but we have to explore. When we were young, we told ourselves the same thing that Kevin told to himself when watching the movie. It's not possible. We began reasoning, it's not possible that the motor started again. Now Kevin is saying, well, no, it's possible. It's a difficult fact, but it may have been. So some past things might be reconsidered now, and the new data have to be collected, compared, and analyzed, in my opinion. Can we listen to Anne from the human side too? if she has some ideas, opinions, suggestions.
Well, thanks for inviting social sciences in to the discussion. As I'm listening to everyone's presentations, the ones that I've heard, you know, the material scientists have a hard enough time trying to come up with methods and how to explain what's going on. So you can imagine what social sciences and psychology are dealing with in terms of the complexities that come into play, because you're bringing up some very good points about how do we understand human perception and senses and things that impact that, that we just don't understand yet. And one of the weigh-ins, you know, there's been a lot of people sharing their accounts, and that's very important. And what's really hard is that psychological and sociological fields have not been addressing this topic very much at all, and are just touching on different points, because you have to get really micro-focused in your questions. And what we need is like a big AI, large language set to look across all kinds of accounts, but you still have to narrow it. But as you were bringing up, one of the difficulties is we're not asking the same questions. And as you read accounts, there will be those sentences said or written about stigma, about personally disturbing effects. And there'll be one sentence kind of put into the narratives that people will share as they are giving the physical descriptions. And so what we're going to hope to look into and get more information about is some of the effects that people are feeling in their subjective experience during an event and in the after effects. And we plan to ask pilots first. And there, you know, there's a lot of different things that people report, you know, that you've all read. It can go from positive and transformative, have a positive life effect, or it could just be unsettling, or the shock and disbelief, the ontological shock that we have all talked about. And it's hard to predict, you know, based upon what kind of encounter or sighting that they have, how they're personally going to react. Some people see very significant objects and have a lot happen, and something about them shuts it down, or they may not deal with it for years, or they may see it as more positive. And then there may be what some would consider a more minor episode of seeing something at a distance that could have a very profound disturbing effect. And so we're also trying to get a hold of those kinds of factors. So there is a few things that we want to focus in on. And one of the major ones is the sociological impact of stigma. And this has such a big impact on if pilots are going to report, you know, in the course of their jobs, they didn't exactly go into their profession because they were interested in UAPs. Some of us do deliberately go in, but they're having these encounters in the course of their work and in front of colleagues, you know, dealing with each other in the course of their work in surprising situations. And so they can't escape, like some can choose whether they're going to tell people in their profession that they have an interest in this. Pilots are on the job, and it's a little harder to avoid because they need to communicate. And so when they talk about stigma, almost every interview I've heard with pilots, and I'm so glad they're going to be speaking here today, we want to know more about the impact of that, because if we can't get past the stigma, then how are we going to have more discussions about reporting? How are we going to have more discussions about how to handle the safety issues? And do we have to wait how many years to prove that this is true to these audiences before it can be addressed? I don't think so. I mean, aviation safety affects all of us, and the health and well-being of pilots affects everyone. And so That's why we want to do a couple of things. We want to contribute to the information that's available in a more systematic way by doing interviews instead of just taking accounts that are there, and get ideas about recommendations of what can really help move things forward faster, and then do an applied service project to get information, resources, and co-create that with pilots now. I think we need a lot more applications, because the delay with academic studies in social sciences, as it is with other fields, is a long time. We could be 5-10 years down the line and still not have anything out there to help people who have an impact in different ways. And so we're going to try to do it in tandem to keep contributing to the field, and then also get some resources out there that others can use. I just want to say one thing of hope, you know, that there's always so much to do in this field, and I'm new to it. And even though there's a lot out there, there was one study done that I will mention about the perceptions of academics and faculty members in colleges. And it's by Yingling and Bell, and it was just published 2023, last year. And they were asking about the perceptions of unidentified aerial phenomenon. And they were wanting to know, what do the colleagues think? Because they're not talking about it very much. So they actually talked to tenured and tenure track faculty across 14 disciplines at 144 major universities. There was 1,460 participants. And the results demonstrated that faculty think that the academic evaluation of UAP information and more academic research on the topic are important, and actually curiosity outweighed skepticism and indifference. And overwhelmingly, and regardless of discipline, faculty were aware of reports that are out there, but not the legislation. And the faculty varied on their personal explanation for UAP. Most was, we just don't know. However, what was really interesting is that about 1/5 or 20% reported UAP observations for themselves or those that they know. And one of the most notable findings in this is that 43% of these faculty members were inclined to be interested to do UAP research if a reputable scholar in their discipline did it first. You know, it's like, you go first. If everything looks okay with what happened with you, then I'll join you because we're really interested. And they exposed them, and this is something I'd like to replicate. They exposed them to information. You know, are you aware of this research? Are you aware of colleagues who are doing this work? And they were aware of it. They hadn't always read about it, but it's amazing that across fields that they were aware of, like Dr. Gary Nolan's work, Avi Loeb, the Galileo Project, Diana Pasulka's book. And Kevin, did you know that about this study? Because your work was listed in here to see if they were aware of that. And the New York Times article and those kinds of things. So the word is getting out there. And so I think this is hopeful that there's a little bit of a sea change, that more are aware than we thought. And with you going forward with boldness, you're truly making a difference in helping other people be interested. So I just wanted to share that there is some progress in stigma in some areas. So thank you.
So I have a quick question.
Go.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, I'm glad to see that people are aware and that it's making a difference. And I've had that. I know of 2 other scientists who are now actively studying UAPs that decided to get into it because of the paper that I published. So I think every published paper is going to make a huge difference. And so I think that's really worth doing. And I've tried to talk to the people at SCU. They're putting wonderful papers on their website. And I think, Ian, you were involved in the one on nuclear weapons, right? Which was a fantastic paper. In fact, I think that's the best evidence we have that these things are intelligent and they're surveying us. I think that's the best evidence, period. And I think that should be published in an academic journal. The problem is it takes some rewriting and work, but I think it's worth doing. And so that's really refreshing to see. And I had a question for, so that's my statement, and then I have a question for Anne and the psychological aspects. You talk about the stigma and pilots not wanting to report things because of stigma. One of the aspects of people's encounters with UFOs is especially problematic, and that's the hitchhiker effect, as it's sometimes called, where paranormal things start happening to the person who's encountered UFOs. So they'll go home a few days later, there's poltergeist activity in their house. I've even heard reports of people levitating. A woman who had seen a UFO found herself levitating in the kitchen, a foot off the floor. I mean, these are things that I wouldn't report if it had happened to me. And and a pilot's certainly not going to do it. So how do we get those reports as well? I mean, what's actually happening to people, or what are they perceiving to happen to themselves afterwards? Some of it's quite substantial and quite shocking. And it's hard to imagine how we're going to get a clear picture of that, especially in the current atmosphere with so much stigma just against the UFOs, period, alone. But the paranormal aspects are even stranger. And even among the UFO community, people don't want to discuss it. And I'm a physicist. This is, for me, you don't talk about this. That's something that you don't even look at. So I find that difficult, and that I think would be important. And the other thing I think is surprising is the number of people who don't think to take photos. And I've had people, tell me that it never occurred to me to take a photograph. I thought about it after it left. And I think that's very common. And one of the big complaints from skeptics is that with 5 billion cell phones out there, why aren't there so many photographs? Well, one of the strange things, people don't think to take them. And the second thing, which I find is interesting, is that people forget that they had the encounter. They somehow, it gets out of their mind, and you can ask people, just for fun, ask people, have you ever seen a UFO? And you'll usually get the answer, no, I've never seen one. And then 10 minutes later, well, wait a minute, there was this one time when, but that doesn't come up right away. It's remembered afterwards. It's not a prominent thing in their memory. And so I agree. I'm glad that social scientists are involved, because there's a lot of interesting psychological effects going on, and not just related to witness testimony, but related to how this affects people afterwards. And I think the whole approach of air safety is a brilliant way to handle this. Pilots need to know what's in the air, and there's stuff in the air that we don't understand, and so we have to understand it. Period. End of discussion. And I think that's a great way to approach this problem. Those are all my comments and questions.
Go, Yasmin.
Yes, I was thinking about what you just said about people who are not talking about UFO during many years. You have several factors that makes people to keep silence. First, you can be afraid to lose your work, especially if you're a pilot. And that's why our studies and other psychologists' studies are very interesting, because you show also to potential witnesses that they can talk. There are some places to talk, and it's normal to feel the effect also of the fear and the sideration, because when you are confronted to such as a weird experience as an encounter with a UFO, and sometimes some kind of contact, you are. It can be also a traumatism, and even if it's not a traumatism, it has to see with something very deep in your unconscious and in your mind, which question also the way you deal yourself with all the awareness and anything that it's not in your culture or in your references, and your own way to react to it, as I said before. And what I think is interesting in this study is also to check about the host factor phenomenon. Jenny Randalls, the English ufologist, spoke a lot about that, because it's interesting to see that the UFO is not alone in the phenomenon, but you have to check the whole environment of the witness, and which is interesting because you can also correlate with magnetic fields or other things. But when you listen to people who have this kind of strange experiments, they always speak about the whole environment. For example, in the host factor, suddenly you don't hear insect, you don't hear some noises, everything is silent. You have kind of heavy air, you know, like before a storm, and yourself, you feel all alone, even if you have some people with you, but you feel kind of weird, you know. And so this sensation to the uncanniness is leading you to have fear, and this fear can lead you to have some natural reaction, like defense mechanism, as sense of humor, like, for example, some pilots who will laugh when you will hear them laugh, or some way to escape. You know, some people will also don't want to talk about it because it's too scary, so it's like a phobia reaction. And you know, you have plenty of reaction, and it's important for the witnesses to know that it's not craziness to react sometimes weird. You don't think about taking your phone because it's like, you know, you just live the moment, and you are like, it's like a, you know, it's a kind of a fraction of your own limits. So it's so weird that you have also a kind of interdiction to speak about it. It's like a taboo, and it's very intimate, such as sometimes some aggression witnesses, some aggression victims speak about, you know. Actually, that's why the expression experiencers is more interesting, because you really live the situation, you don't only witness. And it comes into your mind in a big surprise. You don't have time to put defense on it. It's like, wow, you're just into the situation and you have to deal with that. And that's why your system is making some way to cope with the situation. And it's important that the witnesses know that it's normal to stay silent sometimes. It's normal also to have fear, and it's normal to be depressed sometimes also, because it can remind me of old experiments, especially if you have some traumatic experiments before. Very important, because it's still an infraction to your own limits. And when you have some special encounters with some exposure to electromagnetic fields, you have some effects on the body, and psychologically it's another things to deal with also. So
I just wanted to make a few comments about that, and thanks, Michael, for those comments in the chat, because our attention and our limits, perception and senses play a really big role in this. And Kevin, to your question, it really is complicated in our kind of toxic culture of misinformation and stigma and bias and everything. And you know what I personally believe, because I didn't choose this field either, it chose me. And it chose me because of my own experiences. And I'm always worried about professional credibility. And what I going forward anyway, I've had some really strange experiences, and I have seen these things in the sky, including structured objects that boggle the mind and really weird stuff. And I also filter based on who I'm talking to. And I think we all do that. And what I believe is that each one of us who comes forward in this authenticity of, hey, you know, I've seen this stuff. I believe it. You know, I'm willing to listen. And I'm also willing to take a rigorous approach to really elevating this field in any way possible from my own field of inquiry. I see the impacts, just like that study said on academics. I see the impacts in the lives of experiencers who I work with, of how much it means to have a pilot come forward and say this, for a scientist, for studies to be published. And to me, that is increasing the well-being just by the work that everyone is doing, because it gives other people permission and it helps with their path of integration, that they are not crazy. So I think each one of us in the work that we're doing is really contributing to help experiencers be able to come forward. And we do the best we can for those of us who ask them to create an environment of safety and understanding and openness, and encourage others who work with them to do the same. So thanks, Kevin.
Okay, if I can say,
thank you too.
oh,
That's
small
very good to hear.
Some small comments are the following ones. The first one is the clear concept that the UAP problem mystery study has always having, but still has an important interdisciplinary approach needed. We need both sides of physical sciences, of socio-psychological sciences, and of life sciences too, because it is a very complex issue. The second is that we need the academic involvement, people from the university, academia, the scientists, and this is a good moment because the last 5 years took us an unexpected flow of people that discover the interest of this subject and its importance, while they may have thought that it was a thing for fools up to before the New York Times talked about it and so on. So the responsibility of the academicians that are coming to the subject is to try and publish, as Kevin was saying, because each published article about the subject in a scientific, in a peer-reviewed journal is probably making some new academician coming, and we need the competence of the competent people. It cannot be left to the amateurs as it has been for too long a time. And the third and last conclusion of mine is that we need to continue this kind of exchanges, not just in roundtables. We have to find a way to put together the not so negligible knowledge base that the amateurs have been collecting for nearly 8 years now, putting it in front on the table of the specialists so that they can either work on it or to create new protocols and help this subject to advance, to progress. Or we will be here again in 75 years, probably not us, and remain at the same stadium we find ourselves. So this is a welcome occasion that has not to be left as such, but is to be a stimulus for keeping together, exchanging information and documentation, and go on, each one on his side and all together.
Yeah, I was just thinking about. I totally agree, and I was thinking about the unfortunate fact that the word amateur usually carries negative connotations. Maybe a better word would be the experienced. They're the ones who, the amateurs who we're calling, are the ones who are much more experienced in this phenomena than many of us academics are. And they have a lot of valuable information to share. And I think it's important to recognize.
Well, Mr. Commander, what do you say?
Well, I say that I'm very impressed by all the discussions and the diversity. For sure, there is something which has to be studied more in depth and provide an attractivity for the people who are professional, but who feel as amateur when they are, discussing about UAP things and so on. I think that the challenge is to draw, pilots, scientists,
Yes.
psychologists and so on around the table, and not only discussing but doing, really working on this topic, which is completely amazing because this is something unexpected. This is something hard to understand. And I would like to conclude this morning, talking of time. Time is right. I'm asking myself, what's the meaning? It's about the time effect on the people, and not only the people, but sometimes also on the watch when there is an encounter with a UAP. I have in mind the Valençol case, and there are others, where one of the protagonists, was exposed to an encounter, and he has some feeling and so on, but he will have problem of sleep, for days and months. It looks like, I don't know if it's true, but I suppose that it was checked that his watch was slowing down and so on. What happened? And we have to investigate both on the, I would say, the electrical field, the psychology and all that stuff. There is a huge work to do, and on the time aspect.
Yes.
Also.
Yes.
So that's my conclusion for this morning. And thank you a lot for your participation. Kevin, thank you for joining us. It was at the last moment, but I think it was very important. And if we can have your slides and so on, I will provide mine. It's really interesting to share all these views and to continue. As Edoardo said, a roundtable is just an opportunity to meet and to exchange views, but we have to continue the work a long time and together. So thank you.